And welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction, and also one of your chef instructors in the courses. And today's live event is my office hours, and I want to thank you very much for joining me today, as this gives me a chance to respond to your questions and hopefully, set you at ease as some of you are starting new courses, while others are continuing the course that you previously or earlier enrolled in. Okay. As we get started today, I'd like to mention a couple of quick housekeeping items. As you participate in today's live event, if you would like to ask a question, feel free to type in your question or a comment in the dialog box that's in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And that'll make its way to the queue of questions that you see on the right-hand side. And the second item that I'll mention is that as you look at the individual questions that are already listed, in the upper right-hand corner of an individual question, you'll see a heart-shaped icon. And if you would like that particular question addressed sooner than later, you can click on that icon and it'll push that item up toward the top of the list. Okay. And, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's questions during this live event office hours. Okay. So to begin, from Debbie, our professional chef course did not cover how to calculate the cost of making and selling food. Could you address this? And what additional studies would you recommend to be a private chef or instructor? Okay. Yes, so we've got some big questions here. And let me, first say that, when we think about doing food as a business, it is important to understand the cost, right? The expense of that food to you, right, as the business operator. And we call that food cost. Now, in addition to that, we would also track fundamentally labor cost as well as overhead expenses. So those three broad categories. Overhead expenses and labor costs are often very easy to see. I mean, relatively speaking, easy to understand. But it is the it's food cost that gets to be a little more nuanced. And I'll take a couple of minutes here to put that into some context. Okay. Now, when we think about a dish, right, that we're serving to somebody, or whatever that finished food item is, it could be a slice of cake, it could be a piece of lasagna, it could be a full plate, with 3 or 4 components on it. We have a recipe cost. In other words, the cost of the food that goes on the plate that we need to be aware of. There is then the individual ingredient costs that go into that recipe. So ultimately, we would break down the cost of that plate to its individual recipe components, based upon the quantities that are used for that particular portion. Okay, and the process to do that gets a little more in-depth and nuanced and drawn out in terms of explanation. But if you take a look on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that there's a link posted to an archived live event that discusses this in a little bit more detail. Okay, and again, this is a nuanced and a bit of a tedious process, at least in the beginning, as you first establish your menu with your recipes and the particular ingredients that are involved. Once you do that, in other words, once you cost out all of those ingredients, then you've got your foundation for understanding that money snapshot of your business. Okay. I will also, in terms of providing some context here, I will also mention that many folks that start food businesses don't do this step. And the basic reason for that is, in my experience, is that many of people that aspire to open a business, they love to cook, and it's that creative endeavor that they focus on, and the business side can be a challenge, and so consequently they choose to ignore some of those business functions, business aspects of their bigger enterprise, only to their detriment sooner or later. Okay, and throughout my experience consulting with restaurants over the years, I have come across so many examples of folks that had no idea how much their food cost was, and they were, as we might say, just bleeding money because food was being pilfered. Or food was being mishandled, and there was a high rate of spoilage, for example, and so things were going into the garbage can. But the operator of the business simply didn't know what was going on because that area of the business wasn't tracked. And so I think it's very important that you spend the time to set up properly that aspect of your business, and to monitor it, and understand that from time to time you'll need to update the data, right? The initial information that you compiled, for example, seasonally when prices change, or if you change the portion size of a dish. Okay, you'll need to recalculate the food cost on that particular serving, and so that's a little bit of context. And beyond this brief introduction and the archived live event, there's certainly information online, and I would encourage you to take a look at that. There are books, usually in the realm of hospitality management academic programs. These, in my experience, are textbooks that are available that would cover this topic area as well. All right. All the best to you. And okay, let me actually address this other part to your question, and that is, becoming a culinary instructor. So this is going to be a separate sort of a question, certainly with some overlap, but a separate question in my mind. And a chef instructor ideally will have a very broad foundation of experience around food. And that's going to cover regional cuisine, different categories on the menu, whether it's starters or salads of some sort, main dishes, desserts, some familiarity with the basics of baking, I think are going to be a great idea in terms of establishing a foundation. And then, also having a professional cooking experience. And understanding that context of different types of food service establishments, large volume, smaller scale operations. It could be a coffee shop, it could be a food cart. Having experience in all of these different areas certainly goes a long way to inform the different questions and scenarios that come up within the very broad area of culinary instruction. And so, at least in my experience, that takes a while. As you travel domestically, you travel internationally, you do a lot of cooking yourself. You work with, in my experience, I like to work with home cooks as well as professionals in the industry because there's a lot to learn from all these people around the world. And over time, you couple this with lots of reading, lots of studies. I also have a background in food anthropology, and so you start to bring in history and politics and migration and religion and environmental factors that influence food. And this is I think all valuable information within the realm of culinary instruction. Okay, and so that's a place to start. Thanks. All right, let's see. Next up, when a recipe calls for an onion, which do you choose, a white or yellow, and why? There certainly are some flavored nuances between onions, but I find, whether it's bitterness or less bitterness, or strong oniony flavor, or less strong oniony flavor, but I find that some of those things will vary depending on the time of the year, as well as the place of origin of that food product. Onions, just like any other produce item that we work with, it's a natural and variable product. And so when it comes to the examples that you presented here, white and yellow, oftentimes it doesn't matter to me. And other times it does, relative to, let's say, tradition, the traditional context of a recipe, of a dish that I'm making. And I will also consider cost, whether it's at home or in a business setting. And then, ultimately do a taste test yourself. Part of this will depend upon how you will use that ingredient, in this case, onions. So for example, if you are going to saute the onion or caramelize onions, that transformative process with the application of heat will draw out an overwhelming sweet profile. And so bitterness will go away for the most part, whether it's a white onion or a yellow onion, in which case it really doesn't matter which one you start with. Okay. So again, think about these different factors: cost, do some tasting of your own, think about how you will use the onion, how it's being processed, not just through knife cuts, but also through the cooking that you do. And then try it, different recipe versions, okay, with different onions, and see how you like it. And think about your audience as well. That's going to be an important consideration, I think, as I choose ingredients in a particular dish. All right, thank you. All right, next up from Laura. Welcome, Laura. Among the 5 basic tastes, are there some that particularly go well together and some that you should avoid matching in order to have a balanced dish? And can you mention 1 or 2 examples of dishes that represent balanced versus imbalance? Let's talk sort of basically and broadly about this, Laura. On one hand, the desirability to have different tastes represented in one dish is somewhat culturally mitigated. So, for example, again, this is very broadly speaking here, but in a lot of North American cooking, I might see a couple of tastes that are presented, and a lot of it has to do with mouthfeel as well, which is different, but I think simultaneously important to consider. Okay, but that's a little aside. Back to the topic of taste here, as we compare, let's say, the common approach to North American cooking with, say, the cooking ideals or the principles that I've come across in, say, Thailand, I see 4 or 5 or more of these tastes represented in a dish, and certainly across a meal. And that being the ideal in order to stimulate these different aspects of the internal body according to those local practices, okay, and perspectives on health. Okay. So are there, particular tastes that go well together or that you should avoid matching? Not necessarily. I think it really depends on the context. So, whether it's bitter and sweet or salty and bitter, all of these can go well together. And I think what bridges the gaps, so to speak, between these different tastes, or sort of brings this tapestry of tastes together, are going to be the accompanying flavors of the ingredients and the aromas that come along with those those flavor components, as well as the texture that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So whether it's crunchy or something soft, temperature makes a difference as well. Okay, and so this idea of balancing a dish can become somewhat complex, right, as you drill down deeper and deeper. But take it one step at a time and practice. And I recommend exploring global cuisines. That's often where we're going to find these different aspects of taste emphasized in one direction or another. Okay, so I mentioned Thai cuisine, but take on any cuisine. It might be Indian cuisine. Another favorite of mine is Mexican cuisine, and just note, across a sampling of dishes, a sample menu, whether you're making it at home or whether you're eating out in a restaurant, what tastes are represented, which ones are prominent, which ones are secondary, and then, sort of taste critically, think critically about how those are bridged, how those gaps are filled with the accompanying flavors and aromas and textures and temperatures as well. Okay. Can I give a couple of examples of dishes? Offhand, I don't know offhand. I think certainly if I sat around for a few minutes, I could come up with some examples. But yeah, I mean, try. Okay, here's a couple of examples. Try a fresh salsa, salsa fresca, salsa cruda, something like that, as well as something that's cooked, a cooked salsa, made based on dried chilies, onions, garlic, blended, and start to compare the flavors that come through, understanding that you can control some of what comes through based upon the extent of charring of the chilies or onions, how much bitterness might come through, for example. Okay, and then also the types of chilies that you might choose to go into that dried chili salsa example. Some have more sweetness, some have more earthiness, for example. Okay, but that's not so important as just comparing the finished products. All right, have fun. All right, next up, and another one from Laura. When using potatoes as an ingredient for your preparations, how do you choose among the varieties? That is, what characteristics make each of the classic varieties, yellow, white, red, sweet, more suitable for a dish rather than another? Yes, so, at a foundational level, okay, in this culinary context, we talk about mealy potatoes and waxy potatoes, just two broad categories. And mealy potatoes are those that are relatively higher in starch content, relatively lower in sugar content, and have a mealy texture once cooked, such as a russet potato. That's going to be a classic example. Okay, and then in the other camp, the waxy potato camp are those that are relatively higher in sugars. They tend to have these firmer textures once cooked. And so that's where we find red potatoes and Yukon Golds as a couple of examples. Okay. And in terms of application, waxy potatoes, again, there's a lot of crossover, and ultimately you can do whatever you want. But as a starting point, the general recommendation is to use waxy potatoes, those firm, when cooked potatoes, in preparations where they might be mixed and tossed, but the shape, that cut, is you want to preserve it. So a potato salad, for example, is one where more often than not I would choose a waxy potato. Okay. Now, for a mealy potato, because of its relatively lower sugar content, think about potatoes where you don't want excessive browning, such as French fries. So the typical French fry is made from a russet potato or some other type of mealy potato. Okay. Now, having said that, of course, we see sweet potato fries and so many exceptions to this. Okay, so this is where you get to do whatever you want. I use sweet potatoes, in that context as well as in potato salads. But as a general starting point, think about the texture of the potato when cooked, and then beyond that, have some fun with it. Okay, thank you. All right, and the next question. Are you able to recommend a good book or course on beautifully plating foods? Thank you so much. Tamara, let's talk about this. I'm going to, first of all, direct you to the interwebs, okay, and also your local library. When it comes to plate presentation, in our pro courses, we touch upon some introductory information. But in terms of a more in-depth dive into the topic of plate presentation, do take a look at information online and do a search on Amazon for books. I always recommend going to your local library. So you don't need to spend money initially unless you find something, or until you find something that you want in your personal library. Okay, but when it comes to food presentation, think about some different categories. Okay, so for example, if we're talking about individual plates compared to platters or buffet presentations, there will be some different rules or guidelines. Think about whether it's a savory dish that you're interested in, or a sweet, right? That is to say, a dessert preparation that you want to focus on. Again, some of the guidelines or boundaries will differ. Also, consider whether you're interested in a North American approach as one approach to plating in its sort of bounded context versus some other global approach, because once again, the guidelines or the boundaries will be different based upon the cultural context around that cuisine. Okay, so as you look for books, just think about what area interests you. Okay, and then certainly there are going to be some basic guidelines to follow, whether it's the introduction of height, that third dimension on a plate, which is very interesting, or color contrast, which can be brought in through main components or through a garnish. Very often the items that we cook on a savory plate tend to have sort of brown tones to them. And so the addition of just one or two garnishes at the end of the plating can change things quite a bit. The knife cuts that you choose are part of the plate presentation. And not to mention the arrangement, a visual line that is followed on the plate. And then another thing to keep in mind, generally speaking, is not to overcrowd the plate. And we like to maintain some space where we can actually see the plate, and that's called negative space. Okay, and that just maintains a lighter look overall. Okay, so just some things to keep in mind to start with. And then the other thing is to look at photographs, see what other people are doing, relative to styles of plating. There are many, many styles of plating, even within a North American context. Okay, and have some fun with it. All right, as you explore these areas that are of interest to you. Thank you. All right, and the next question. I'm interested in transitioning to a plant-based diet. What would be your most beneficial advice you could give me? I would say take it at your own pace. Okay. Over the years, I've worked with many, many thousands of students that are making a transition in one direction or another. And, I see a fair number of people that are very gung-ho and, make these very abrupt changes in their lifestyle. And for some people, that can be difficult to maintain without allowing yourself a chance to transition into this newness. And that transition means a lot of different things, right? It could mean how to use a knife. It could mean, how to apply and control the various dry heat cooking methods. Or it could be allowing your body and brain the time to adjust to a low salt or no salt cooking, right? The whole same thing holds true with added fat or sugars, okay? And, some of these adjustments with our body and brain, for example, can take a month or two or more. And so have patience with the process, take it at your pace, establish a long-term goal, right? That North Star, so to speak, in order to keep you on track on those days when you feel like stepping off the tracks. All right. And, if you need to take a little detour to experience a little, sweet tooth satisfaction, whatever the case might be, don't be hard on yourself. Get back on track and follow your path. But again, give yourself time to adjust. When it comes to learning how to use a knife efficiently and effectively, there's discomfort involved. Sometimes we have aches and pains through our shoulder, our neck, our hips, as our body gets used to a new activity. Sometimes where our hand rests on top of the knife, on the spine of the knife, the skin gets worn off right in here. And it takes time to develop a callus. It could be, a couple, 3 weeks. And through that process, there's redness, there's blistering, there's skin that sloughs off, and it can be downright painful for a period of time. But we push through that in order to get to a better place. And so this is what I mean by be patient and take the transition at your own pace, knowing that you got some time. Okay, this is for you. All right, thank you. All right, next question. For no oil cooking, which type of pans is recommended or best suited? Stainless steel, nonstick, cast iron, enamel. Okay, so if we're talking about some high heat cooking, in the no oil context, for example, using the water mercury ball test that we show in our courses, then I would recommend staying away from a nonstick pan, at least the ones that I'm familiar with that have a coating on the inside, because you can start to approach that temperature or that temperature range where the nonstick coating may be damaged. Okay, in which case you try out stainless steel, which is very hardy to high temperatures. Cast iron enamel can also be used, but probably not at as high a temperature as you could use with stainless steel. Okay, now I say could use because you may not even need to go to an extremely high temperature, with stainless steel. Okay, there's going to be some experimentation on your part that will be necessary. Okay, and now relative to that water ball test, right, or the mercury ball test, when we show that, we use a stainless steel pan. The surface of a stainless steel pan is tight and it's smooth. And so that water ball is formed very nicely. to resemble a ball of mercury, hence the name. Now, as we switch to different types of pans, whether it's a a cast iron of any sort, then the water ball doesn't look the same. Okay, and so we need to practice to understand the characteristics of the pan. Okay, because we don't have other videos that cover how to do that test, in different types of pans. Okay, so have some patience with that process. Exercise your curiosity to understand your cooking technology. Now, at the same time, if you want to use no oil cooking, with a nonstick pan, that's fine as well. I recommend a lower temperature, which means that very often the cooking time will be extended because it'll take more time to develop the browning in that nonstick pan at a lower temperature. Okay, but you can get there. Okay, again, it takes some practice to understand the particular pan technology that you're using. Okay, but all of them can be used successfully. All right. All righty. Next up from Rebecca. I live at 7,000 feet above sea level. How will this affect my cooking? So, this is potentially a big discussion. There are a lot of subtleties depending on what it is that's being prepared. I will, briefly explain some of the broad things that you might notice. And one of those is that, water will boil at a lower temperature. And so, therefore, any cooking that you're doing in the way of blanching, parboiling, even simmering, where we do a lot of our cooking, will take longer. Okay, because when you see those bubbles, the actual temperature of the water will be a little bit lower. Okay, so and that's because there's less atmospheric pressure, right, to hold those bubbles in, and so they're released more easily through the water. Okay, now having said that, if we look at baking, for example, gases that are produced from the leavening agent, whether it's a chemical leavener or from yeast, they will be released with less resistance, and so leavening occurs faster at higher elevations, and so adjustments would need to be made if you're baking. Okay, having said that, a pressure cooker is used with success by many people at high elevation for a lot of different cooking applications. Okay, and then also you'll see posted just a moment ago is a link, and it's a link that I like to provide to students who ask about high altitude cooking. And this is information provided by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Please take a look at this, and I think it'll provide some good points of reference as you experiment in your own kitchen. Okay, thank you. And hello, Emma. Can you explain the difference between flavor and taste? Many of my assignments seem to make a distinction, and I want to make sure I explain my assignments in full detail. Yes, in many of our assignments and in all of our pro assignments, we request that students start considering their food at a deeper, more nuanced level, and we ask for descriptions, commentary on taste and flavor. And taste, broadly speaking, touches upon these areas in the mouth, such as sweet, sour, there's bitter, and saltiness, umami, astringency. I also include on this list, as well as the pungency that we associate with hot, spicy foods, such as ginger or chilies. Okay. Now, some of this is culturally mitigated. All right. So here in the United States, we will emphasize the first 5 items that I mentioned, where astringency and pungency are not typically considered on the list of tastes. But in other parts of the world, they are considered very important aspects of the finished dish. And I include them as well. in my cooking and my discussion of taste. Okay, when we look at flavor, okay, flavor is basically one side of the coin, so to speak, along with aroma. And so, flavor is said to be made up of our aroma or aromatic experience to the extent of maybe 75 or 80%. And so, in other words, if you were to plug your nose and taste food, right, a lot of that food interest goes away because we've cut off the incoming data, right, the sensations through the olfactory bulb, and so that's going to be the basic difference. Okay, taste kind of touches upon these basic. Maybe I shouldn't say basic, but fewer categories, whether it's 5 or 7, however you want to look at it. Whereas tastes number in the thousands. And so there's also practice, right, that is involved in developing your focus on taste or flavor and to start to understand what it is that you're experiencing. And, a fun way to do that is to eat foods blindfolded, all right? And you will also see how important our sight is in recognizing the flavor of a food, all right? But it takes practice, takes repetition, it takes a lot of thought, and discussion as well. So if you can have conversations about food with your dining partners, that goes a long way in helping you understand what it is that you are perceiving. Very often we are tasting something and it's very enjoyable, but we don't have vocabulary for it. So therefore, having discussions with people that maybe are farther down that path, so to speak, than we are, will help us acquire vocabulary, identify aromas or these combinations of tastes and flavors and aromas that we're experiencing. Okay, and so this too is a long process. It's a transition, right, to a deeper level of understanding of food. So please have patience and understand that it might take you the rest of your life to understand more and more. All right. Thank you. All right, Margaret. I'm starting the FOK culinary course and beginning to learn how to use good, sharp knives, such as my new chef's knife. Can you recommend the best kind of cutting board to use? Yes, let's talk a bit about cutting boards. And I'll start off by talking about cutting boards that I stay away from. And those are surfaces that are particularly hard. And a couple of examples that come to mind that I have seen recently are glass cutting boards and stainless steel cutting boards, which would, relatively speaking, dull your cutting edge prematurely. And so I don't use those. I prefer a natural fiber or even plastic. I use various cutting boards in those categories. And whether it's bamboo or mahogany or something else, I'm not a stickler about that. I know that some people are, and you can read a lot of discussions online where people split hairs about the relative hardness of a particular bamboo over white oak or something else, maple or whatever it is. Again, you can make that choice based upon those deeper discussions. But I just recommend staying away from these particularly hard surfaces, and then you should be fine. Okay, thank you. All right, next up, in FOK, we are learning to use a chef's knife. My knife set includes a tomato serrated knife, when doing activity 35, dicing ingredients practice, I used a chef's knife. Now, what advantage, if any, is there using a chef's knife over a tomato knife? The advantage for me is the simplicity of using a single knife. And, I don't need to bring out more than one knife necessarily and use, switch between knives and then clean multiple knives. And, at home, that's not perhaps so critical. My background is in part in professional kitchens where speed is of the essence and time is always short. And so we learned to use a single knife. We learned to keep it sharp so that it cuts through tomato skin and all that. And so that's the advantage that I see in using a single knife for most of the work that you do. There are certainly situations where I would elect to change knives, and those are going to be usually more specific tasks where my chef's knife isn't perhaps the best choice. All right, but again, if you prefer to use your serrated tomato knife, feel free to do that. Thank you. All right. Again, from Christopher. Great. Can I cook out of my own home kitchen if I started an online food delivery business? If not, where? So if we're talking about a business and cooking for the public, then all of your local jurisdiction laws will apply. Okay. And generally speaking, you've got the health guidelines that may be mandated by your county. It could be at a municipal level. We also around here have some guidelines from the state level. It depends on the aspect of cooking. But the bottom line is that the cooking environment, right, the kitchen, in my experience, cannot be your home kitchen. It must be what we call an inspected kitchen, inspected by a health inspector that comes from your local government offices. Okay, and so you'll need to take a look at what is required in your locality. All right, thank you. And next up, another one from Christopher. Should I open a cooking business as an LLC in case any person gets sick with my food and sues me? Well, this is an interesting question, and this is a legal question, and certainly goes beyond the usual scope of cooking that we focus on here. And certainly this gets to be a nuanced question, and around the law and strategies around the law. And there could be some tax implications as well. So you might talk to both an attorney as well as your accountant. All right, thank you. And the next question, I want to learn how to make more vegan and plant-based foods that have flavor and great taste for health reasons. What seasonings and flavors can I use other than garlic, onions, and any hot, spicy seasonings? Okay, well, let me begin by saying that, as you move through one of our courses, you will learn task by task or unit by unit how to control the development of flavor. That is really at the core, right, of satisfying cooking. And some of that involves cooking methods. Some of it involves ancillary techniques that you might apply. And some of it certainly involves the ingredients that you choose. And that also can become complex in terms of how we how and when we combine ingredients. So as you enroll in one of our courses, please have patience as this process will build upon itself as you move from unit to unit. And it's going to be also very important and up to you that you practice each of those techniques or flavor development aspects that are introduced over and over again to better understand how the tastes and flavors and other techniques combine to create a certain outcome, and then begin to experiment in areas that interest you, right? Omitting an ingredient, introducing a new ingredient, introducing 3 new ingredients, and so on and so forth. And then let your curiosity take you around the globe, okay, to experiment with and learn about global cuisine. Okay, there is, a whole world of fresh herbs, a whole world of spices, for example, not to mention the cooking methods and other techniques that are involved in the kitchen work that we do. Okay, so that is my response for you. All right, so this is a lifelong endeavor. It's ultimately going to be all up to you once you learn those foundational points from us. All right, thank you. And another question from Audi. I'm on task 43, steaming of FOK. Is there a time chart for steaming vegetables? And no, we don't, as far as I can recall, have a steaming chart for vegetables. And what comes to mind for me are the variables. Okay, just what it is that you've chosen to steam, as well as the maturity of the item that you are going to steam, and also how you have prepared it in terms of the size of the individual pieces. All of those variables. Oh, look at that! We do have a steaming chart to reference. Okay. Okay. Yes, it's apparently an older chart that we have. But as you take a look at this, keep in mind the things that I just mentioned, and that is these variables. Part of what we hope that you walk away with after a Ruby experience is the confidence in controlling, applying and controlling cooking methods. And steaming, of course, is one of those. And to that end, I encourage students to perhaps look at a chart as a very general reference, but otherwise to move away from charts. So that you understand what ingredients that you're dealing with, and the cookware and all those other nuances of your particular environment that will affect the outcome of the food. Okay, and that is the beauty of cooking. When we provide a recipe, for example, in my opinion, a recipe is a suggestion. Okay, and at the end of the day, you get to control the recipe rather than the recipe controlling you in your outcome. So we need to, along the way of learning to cook, we need to really understand the nuances of steaming, sauteing, right, sweating, grilling, all of these cooking methods, so that when you see that in a recipe, understanding and appreciating that the ingredients that you might have in your refrigerator will be a little bit different based upon the time of the year, based upon the place of origin of the food item, based upon the maturity of the food item, its relative toughness, and all those other variables that go into these natural items that we use when cooking. Okay, and ultimately you will have control over all of these variables. That's our desire. That's our objective in the way that we approach cooking, with a focus on methods and techniques rather than recipes. Okay, and so that's my short answer in response to your question about a steaming chart. Thank you. All right, next up from Pilar. What's the best pan for making French omelets? Typically I would use myself and steer somebody toward a non-stick pan, and probably something in the neighborhood of a 6 or 7 inch diameter pan. But again, it depends a little bit on just the portion size that you want, okay, and how you might be serving that particular item. Okay, but a non-stick pan is great in my opinion. It's very, very convenient. Um, some folks don't like to use non-stick pans, and I respect that as well. In which case, you probably want to use some sort of a fat as a lubricant to help, minimize or avoid the sticking, right? That is so common with egg cookery. Okay, and time they will apply very small scratches, and these micro scratches will accumulate, and they do anyway over time. But you can slow down that process and increase the lifespan of your nonstick pan. Okay. Now, having said that, I'll add one more thought, and this is that, in my opinion, a nonstick pan is a disposable item. I never suggest, I'd never encourage anyone to spend a lot of money on a nonstick pan, because over time they do accumulate micro scratches, making the pan sort of sticky, right, over time. And at some point it will need to be replaced. Okay. And so therefore, spend reasonably, but no need to buy some fancy pants nonstick pan, okay, for that reason. All right. I hope that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Next up from Linda. Kimchi is really good for you. Is there any way to pick up or change the flavor of kimchi? It has an acquired taste. Yeah, it certainly does, right? As so many of these fermented foods do. And having said that, I mean, some kimchis have almost very, very little fermentation on them, and so they have a very mild flavor. But that is to say that there are many different types of kimchi, and if you take a look out into the broader world of kimchi on the interwebs, you're going to come across these many different styles with some discussion on how you might swap in or out an ingredient that is an aromatic or a flavoring ingredient. And to get you started, please take a look at the link that just popped up to an article from Serious Eats, some of my favorite folks that talk about food there at Serious Eats. And this particular page, I think, that is linked here, well, if you scroll down, you'll also see some different recipes of different styles of kimchi, and hopefully you'll find something that you enjoy. Right. Thank you. All right, looks like Austrin's back. Howdy. Yes, long time no see. And let's see, I was wondering, how do I approach mastering food? By that, I mean creating my own plates from prior knowledge. Do I focus on international favorites or choose a specific region, or both? Wow. Austin, I love your questions. They're always huge. And if we can sit down one of these days over a meal, I think we'd have a beautiful discussion. But I'll keep it brief here, okay? And say that it takes time, and but you can certainly speed up that process, right? By doing a lot of eating, just experiential eating of different cuisines. And I always take a global approach, but even at the global level, you got to drill down to regions and just kind of play in that region for a while before you go somewhere else for your travels, right? And so do that. And then bring that home and do some cooking. Try to replicate those dishes. Pick up a favorite cookbook of that same region and do some other things so that you start to understand the cooking methods, which on the surface might look the same as we do in a North American context, but can have some differences in the way that it's carried out at a nuanced level in that particular cuisine. Okay, and then to the extent that it's possible, work with cooks and chefs from those particular areas of the world that you happen to be studying. Okay. And, when I say cooks and chefs, I mean home cooks, established, confident home cooks, as well as pros in restaurants. And you can, I suppose even, in the U.S. where I'm based, I seek those people occasionally. And certainly when I'm traveling outside of the U.S., I will seek those people. Understand that so much of the food we see in restaurants have very direct origins in home cooking. And so that's why I like to spend time with home cooks that have a lot of experience. And then I can understand better the roots of those dishes that I see in restaurants. Okay, so that's one way, to go down this path of mastering, so to speak, food, right? Just understanding food at a deeper level. Okay, and making more and more connections across this context of food and society, which is all about people. Okay. Also study history and all the other social aspects of food along the way. All right. Have fun with it. It's a beautiful life path ahead of you. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up from Cassidy. What is the current wait time for grade appeals? I submitted an appeal as instructed in the grading and haven't received an email or information about it yet. Well, I mean, normally our timing on responses to appeals is very much the same as with assignments. Maybe it's a couple, 3 days. If there's a holiday tucked in there, maybe that it gets extended by a day or two. But if you haven't heard back for some reason, there could be something else going on. So definitely write in to support at ruby.com, and we'd be happy to take a look at your particular concern. Thank you. And let's see, next up, how many days can I store pasta dough with eggs in the fridge? I suggest using pasta dough, most any pasta dough, within a day or so, if possible. Okay, and if you start to get much beyond a day, you're going to start to see these dark spots develop. At that point, the dough is still edible, but visually, it's maybe not so attractive. Okay, otherwise, in terms of having a more perishable ingredient like eggs, think about other leftover foods in the fridge, where my general guideline is a week. Okay, and then I'm really taking a closer look at that item as to its viability. Some things certainly will last much longer than a week, while other things might be ideal in, say, 5 days. Okay, so that's my approach to pasta dough with eggs in it. Try to use it up pretty quickly. Otherwise, keep an eye on it, understanding that visually it might not be quite as attractive as on day one, but certainly edible. Thank you. And next up from Delma, what substitute can I use in place of umami for the umami activity? Task 111. I have a soy allergy. I typically use coconut aminos at home as substitute. However, I know the taste is not the same because the coconut aminos is sweeter than the tamari or the soy sauce. Okay. So task 11 here is in the Forks Over Knives course. And this is the assignment where you're adding things to rice, right? And then paying attention to how the taste and flavors change with these layers of ingredients, right? We're layering tastes and flavors. And that's at the basis of developing umami in a dish. Now, let me say that very often, especially from like an American context, which is often very grounded in science, the discussion around umami immediately goes to MSG, right? Monosodium glutamate or glutamates that are naturally occurring in foods. And indeed, that is an important component to the umami experience. But from a different angle, from a Japanese cultural perspective, and this is where the concept of umami emerged. We're talking more broadly about, or maybe more simply, about the layering of flavors, creating more complex and delicious aspect to the dish that you're preparing. Okay, and so that's what Task 111 is aiming at. All right, and so here, if you have an allergy to one of the components, take a look at the other suggestions that are presented in the task. There's a list of several other things that you might choose from, whether it's sauteed mushrooms or nutritional yeast. There are also some linked informational items in the right-hand sidebar that will provide some other context for you. Okay, but give that a try. And you can certainly, put together, another ingredient or two for this particular task activity. All right. Thank you. All right. Next question. Do we really need to add salt while poaching an egg? Why, when I poach an egg, does some white stick to the pan? So question number one, do we really need to add salt? No, you don't. Salt is added to the water as a seasoning. But you don't have to add it. It's certainly optional. Okay, some of the I guess mitigating reasons for why you might not add salt is perhaps your guest, right, or the diners might have a health concern around sodium intake, or perhaps you provide other flavoring components to the dish, or maybe condiments on the table, that would provide saltiness or other points of interest on the palate. So anyway, it's optional. Okay, and then the second part of your question: why do egg whites stick? Proteins tend to stick, whether they're in eggs or meat or somewhere else, and so it's just kind of a nature of that component of food, in my experience. Chemically, I don't know, but culinarily, that's what happens. And so when an egg, is placed into the poaching medium, we give it a little bit of time to set up, to coagulate on the surface, and then I recommend going in with usually a rubber spatula works very well. You can also do it with a large metal spoon or some other utensil, but just very gently loosen it up along the surface of the pan so that it can finish its cooking process without being stuck to the bottom of the pan. Okay, and you should have no problems moving forward. Thank you. All right, next up. In task 36 of Forks Over Knives, I prepared the Hollywood Bowl brown rice salad, which my husband and I enjoyed, but it says under success that it has not been rating. How do we rate a dish? Wow, offhand, I don't know. I mean, I don't remember. I haven't been in the recipes from the user perspective in so long that I don't remember offhand. But if you want to write us this same message, Audi, to support@ruby.com, that'll give me or one of my colleagues a chance to look in more detail at this process. Thank you. All right, Laura, thank you so much for regularly hosting this very helpful Q&A live event and for putting so much effort in answering clearly and thoroughly all of our questions. Laura, it's my pleasure. And I want to thank you as well and everybody else here, right, for your participation. And I also want to thank you, Laura, for asking all the questions that you do in the course, right, through the Q&A function. Those are also fun to think about and address. They get me pacing back and forth in my office here. And also, just referring to things that I haven't referred to perhaps in a while. So I really appreciate your sense of curiosity and your level of participation. And again, I want to thank everybody here for taking the time to join me today and for participating at the level that you do, whether it's by asking a question or just by listening intently. All right. Thank you, Laura. Let's see. Next up, I am interested in plant-based nutrition and starting the plant cooking course. How difficult it will be for a person who is only cooking at home. What's the best topic to start? Larissa, our courses are, for the most part, designed for the home cook. I think certainly a course that you're looking at is going to be designed for the home cook. In terms of that depth of cooking, or that maybe the intensity of the instructor feedback will differ a little bit between, say, the Forks Over Knives course, which is a more introductory course, versus the professional plant-based certification course, okay, where we do expect a little bit more engagement from the students. Our feedback is a little bit more in depth, a little bit more critical at times, okay. That's going to be true of our pro courses, generally speaking, okay. And the basic differentiation there is that with our pro courses, we have a lot of students that have some sort of a professional aspiration. And so we want to start to bridge that gap between your typical home cooking and what you might find in a restaurant. Even if a person doesn't intend to cook in a restaurant, that's the way our pro courses are designed. And so, we notch it up a little bit. Okay. Now, having said that, it should be no problem for a home cook to enroll in one of our pro courses, in this case, the Pro Plant course that you're inquiring about. But do understand that we hope and to some degree expect that you will sort of dig in and do the best that you can, and certainly prepare for each task and lesson to the extent that you feel it's necessary to do so, and then we will provide feedback accordingly. Okay, and that feedback, of course, is for your learning benefit, and so keep an open mind as you move through any of our courses. Okay. And what's the best topic to start with? Our courses are designed in a sequential manner, designed in a way that makes sense from a learning perspective. And so we provide the more basic foundational components early in the course, and then we drill down into more details as you move through the course, as well as more complex aspects of cooking as you move through the course. Okay, so ideally, from our perspective, you would start with task number 1, and you would just move on through one by one. All right, thank you. All right, next up from Melia. Is it realistic for one knife to properly chop large cube and also small pieces of vegetables? It seems like most experienced chefs talk about their one knife. The quick answer is yes. Very often we'll have our go-to chef knife that will do most of our work. But some of this, it also is, again, culturally mitigated. And you've heard me say this a couple of times already today. As we look at, in this case, professional cooking approaches around the world, you're going to find some places where chefs and cooks, up and coming cooks, are taught to use more than one knife, depending on what the task is. And so there's more than one approach. Okay. And, I'm thinking about the Japanese kitchen when I say that, where there tends to be a more nuanced approach to knife choice than there is in a North American kitchen, for example. Okay. With a lot of crossover. I mean, there's a lot of blended information these days. Okay. So those statements are very general statements. All right. But for home cooking, where you can certainly do the majority of your cooking with one knife. Okay, but like the earlier question we heard today around a serrated tomato knife, for whatever reason, you might choose to use a specialty knife for something else. Okay. Now, let me provide some other context here, just some things to keep in mind, to kind of be aware of or be careful of. And that is, for example, if your chosen sort of go-to knife is a thinner bladed, lighter weight knife, be careful when you cut harder, right, more dense items, where the chipping of the blade becomes a higher probability. Okay, and so that is an example of where you might choose to use a couple of different knives. A heavier, thicker bladed knife for dense items, winter squash or particular root vegetables come to mind, versus a thinner, lighter weight knife for bell peppers and Napa cabbage and so many other things that you might process in greater volume on most days. Okay, but of course, part of this depends upon your type of cooking. Okay, and what sort of fruits and vegetables you will handle predominantly. Okay, and so think about that and understand that having one knife will get you through most of the work. Having a couple of knives might be necessary in some cases. Thank you. And looks like the last question here from Juanita. In lesson 35 of FOK Ultimate, what is meant by perpendicular cut? Can you please describe perpendicular cut? So perpendicular means 90 degrees. And so without having task 35 in front of me, I don't understand, I don't remember the exact wording, but fundamentally, okay, if we have an item that's flat on the cutting board, if we want to make nice cubes, right, or square edges, then we need to bring down the knife perpendicular or at a 90-degree angle to the cutting board. All right. If you're at a different angle, more or less, then you will cut a bunch of trapezoids and not, square-edged cuts, which is our target, right? That's the ideal. Okay, and we're practicing to that ideal in order to develop our knife skills as far as we can, as far as we practically want to do that, especially in a home kitchen situation. Okay, so we're aiming high, understanding that reality might settle down somewhere in here. Okay, so that's what we mean. Okay, by aim for or try to make perpendicular cuts. All right, hopefully that's helpful. Thank you. And that closes today's list of questions and brings to conclusion my office hours. And again, I want to thank all of you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again. In the meantime, I wish you all the joys of cooking. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.